Businesses face a range of threats as cybercriminals attempt to leverage our reliance on email and other applications against us. But one particular form of attack is proving to be increasingly lucrative to the extent it's even drawing established hacking groups away from malware campaigns. I'm Danny Palmer. This is ZDNet Security Update. With me to discuss business email compromise attacks is Crane Hassold, Senior Director of Threat Research at Agari. Thanks for joining me, Crane. So first of all, what exactly is business email compromise?
So business email compromise is a cyber threat that's been around for about 5-6 years now, has become increasingly common. And essentially what it is, it started out as essentially an impersonation style attack where a cyber criminal would simply email an employee at a company, usually an accounts payable specialist or maybe even the CFO, pretending and looking like they are an executive at a company, someone like the CEO. Requesting a wire transfer to a supposed vendor that needs to be paid for an overdue payment. That sort of morphed over the past couple of years into a number of other types of attacks. We have payroll diversion attacks, so trying to get cyber criminals to try to get HR specialists to change direct deposit details for executive salaries. And then we have some of the more increasingly common and more sophisticated threats, which are the vendor email compromise attacks, which are when it's essentially a hybrid of credential phishing and identity deception that means that a cyber criminal takes over the email account of usually someone like a small supplier or vendor, and then collects intelligence from those email boxes about different payments that are supposed to be due, and then targets that vendor's customers requesting payments for actually payments that are supposed to be due, of course, diverting them to other accounts.
So what is it about BEC attacks that makes them so successful? Because we've seen over the last few years, there's been various incidents where companies have lost hundreds of thousands, maybe even more, to these attacks, or because cyber criminals have managed to pose as ultimately someone the recipient thinks they can trust.
Yes, that's a good question. And so there are three primary reasons why business email compromise has become so popular and caused so much loss over the past few years. The first reason is, historically, there have been, a number of companies out there that have focused on, combating cybercrime and email-based threats. But most of them have focused on combating more technically sophisticated types of attacks, different types of malware, ransomware, things like that. But what they haven't gotten very good at is identifying and stopping those less technically sophisticated attacks, like business email compromise, which is essentially, in most cases, just pure social engineering. There's no malicious payloads. There are no bad links. It's just text pretending to be, a trusted individual or trusted entity, and then trying to get money to get wired out that way. And so what we've seen over the past few years is that the cyber criminals have realized that their more technically sophisticated attacks have become less successful. And so what the cyber criminals have done is they've become less technically sophisticated in their attacks. And that has caused the defenses to miss a lot of the BEC attacks that we see today. One of the second reasons that BEC has become so popular is that the return on investment, if you think about this in like a business perspective, the return on investment for BEC attacks is so much higher than other types of cybercrime activity. When you think of Eastern European and Russian cyber criminal actors, historically, they've been associated with more technically sophisticated attacks. And one of the things that we had always thought was going to happen was, thinking to yourself, why are they spending so much time and money on hiring developers for their malware and setting up infrastructure when they could just send someone an email, tell them to send me money, and they'll do it. Again, thinking about this as a business, from an overhead perspective, there's not really much behind the scenes with a BEC attack, and so the amount of profit you're able to make from those attacks is significantly higher. And then the third reason is, social engineering at its core is relatively simple. As long as human beings have been on this earth, interacting with one another for thousands of years, we've been social engineering each other. The only difference is now the medium that we're doing it is through a computer and not through face-to-face or over the telephone or through the mail.
You've done a lot of research into this area. What does a typical BEC operation look like, if there is such a thing?
Yes, that's a good question. So there are a number of different components to a BEC cyber criminal organization, and one of the things that we've seen in all the research we've done is that it's generally a loosely associated group of individuals who come together, relatively temporarily for a specific goal, and that's to make money. And so you have a lot of the central operators, the ones who are actually running the scams, that are going to be based in places like West Africa. Specifically, Nigeria has been, the hotbed for BEC scammers over the past few years. But then you have other actors that are associated with these groups as well. So you have the money mules. The money mules are the ones who are going to be receiving the funds from these attacks. In many cases, these are going to be unwitting victims of other types of scams, like romance victims or work from home scam victims, and they're going to be the ones that receive the money under certain auspices, and then they pass the money, and eventually gets back to the scammer. And then you have some other actors that are associated with these scams, like the what we call the mule herders or the loaders, and they're the ones who actually are responsible for cultivating this network of money mules, essentially as a way to receive all these fraudulent transactions. And there are a number of other individuals that are associated with these as well. You have the spammers, who are the ones who are setting up credential phishing sites that are used to compromise credentials. But again, these could be individuals that are in numerous places all over the world, and are just come together for specific purposes, which is to make money in a certain given period of time.
You mentioned West Africa as one of the hotbeds there, which something we have seen over the last few years. There's also another new player on this scene that you've done some research into, coming out of Russia, which is quite significant in and of itself. Can you tell me a bit about this group, please?
Yeah, sure. So the group that we saw, that we actually released our original report on back in July of last year, was a group that we call Cosmic Links. And our research into Cosmic Links was actually pretty interesting, in the fact that, as far as we could tell, it was the first reported BEC organization that originated out of Russia. And so again, as I mentioned earlier, most Eastern European and Russian cybercriminal organizations are known for more technically sophisticated types of cyber attacks. And yet now we have this Russian BEC group that is using completely pure social engineering tactics to create very realistic looking BEC emails. And what's interesting about Cosmic Links is that they employ what we call a dual impersonation scheme. So they originally impersonate a company's CEO, and then they pivot and pass the target victim off to another persona that looks like an attorney, usually based out of the UK, that's actually impersonating an actual attorney in the UK, who's supposed to be in charge of facilitating a transaction for the acquisition of a Southeast Asian company. You can also tell by the way that Cosmic Links constructs their emails that they're spending significantly more time and effort creating very realistic looking initial emails. We've seen Cosmic Links emails being written in English, French, Japanese, and Finnish. And regardless of whatever language it's being translated into or being written in, we've always seen that it is written in almost perfect spelling, grammar, and language, which is something you don't see with most other BEC groups. And then, because this is a mergers and acquisitions scheme, the amount of money that they're able to make is significantly higher than other types of BEC groups. So the average that's requested for most basic wire transfer BEC attacks is about $55,000, whereas Cosmic Links, when you look at their average that they're asking for, is well over $1 million. And so they've been active since the early last year. And based on the fact that they're still around today, we can tell that they're having success with their attacks.
When people think about cybercrime from Russia, it's often things like malware or ransomware which come to mind. Well, BEC isn't really something that's associated with Russian cybercriminal groups. And we've seen over the last year that things like ransomware can make a lot of money. So what is the significance of this group choosing BEC attacks?
Yeah, I think it shows you that the sophisticated cyber criminals that are out there are realizing the value of business email compromise attacks and are starting to pivot in that direction. While malware has been successful over the years, without a doubt, one of the really interesting aspects of business email compromise, especially over here in the States, is when you look at some of the data that's come out, um, comparing business email compromise to things like ransomware. Business email compromise by far comprises the most amount of financial loss for businesses all over the world. In a report that came out last year from the FBI, 40% of all cybercrime losses that they tracked came from as a result of business email compromise attacks. And so while ransomware, gets all the news, it's the thing that a lot of media talks about. It is nothing compared to the amount of loss that's caused by things like business email compromise.
And what actually happens when an organization falls victim to this? Because I imagine by the time they've realized they've sent however many hundreds of thousands of dollars to cyber criminals, be they in West Africa, Russia, wherever in the world, it's too late. That money's gone.
Yeah. So one of the good things in recent years is that there's been a big concerted effort to try to stop a lot of that money from getting out. And so, over here in the U.S., the FBI has set up some certain teams. There's some rapid action teams that are meant to deploy very quickly and get in touch with banks as soon as possible when a business email compromise attack has been reported. And they've been somewhat successful in getting some money back for their victims. So that's good news that you have a more focused effort to try to combat these types of attacks. But you're right, in certain cases, in things like a vendor email compromise attack, where the actual loss might not be realized for weeks, if not months, when a vendor says, "Wait a second, I haven't been paid for this actual payment," and they actually go back and ask the customer, and the customer says, "Well, yeah, I paid you, a few weeks ago," but by then, by the time the fraud has actually been identified, then the actual chances of getting that money back is become very slim.
When it comes to the evolution of BEC attacks, how are they changing, and how has something like coronavirus and the way people are working remotely impacted how BEC campaigns are working?
Yeah, so one of the things, outside of the more sophisticated actors getting into the BEC space, which creates much more realistic looking emails that could conceivably come from someone like a CEO. There are, so, what's really interesting when we talk about the past year with coronavirus and COVID is that we've seen a lot of BEC attacks actually starting to deploy themes in their emails that reference coronavirus and COVID. One of the more interesting aspects of Cosmic Links is that after our initial report, they actually disappeared for a good 3 months. And in mid-October, they returned to a little bit of a steady pace. And then since mid-December, they've been extremely active. But one of the things that we realized that they did was they actually, early in their campaigns, they would reference coronavirus when the pandemic had first started. And they essentially used it as a rapport builder for their BEC attacks. Well, in their recent attacks, they've actually started deploying inserting some coronavirus themes in there as well. But this time, they're actually referencing COVID vaccines, which shows you that they're paying attention to global interests and what people want to be talking about or what people are discussing around the world, essentially to build that trust with their supposed target before the actual request for the money is in there. And so coronavirus has become a big component to fit a lot of phishing attacks, not just BEC, over the past year, because everyone's thinking about it. It's always on everyone's mind. And if you can sort of catch people off guard with some themes that are familiar to them and that they may put their guard down, then you're going to have some higher chances of success.
As you've detailed, one of the key things about BEC attacks is that they're subtle and hard to detect, especially if someone like Cosmic Links has put in that effort to making up or basing the emails off of real personas. So how can organizations try to protect themselves from becoming the next victim of one of these attacks?
Yeah, well, I think one of the biggest things to keep in mind is to make sure that when you think about your email defenses, to make sure that you have defenses in place that are able and equipped to protect against social engineering attacks, to basic social engineering attacks like the business email compromise. Now, that's number one. If you can stop it from getting to the employees, then that's the best course of action. The second thing is it's all about process. Say a BEC attack does make it to an employee, and a wire transfer is requested. The big thing to think about here is to just focus on the process, validate that a request is being made out of band, so it's some sort of different source or a separate communication to the supposed requester. So if you get an email from someone who looks to be the CEO requesting money for a wire transfer, go to the wire transfer, go to the CEO, call them, email them separately, send them a Slack message saying, just want to make sure that you requested this wire transfer, and that should stop most of these types of attacks once that validation is being done. Because at the end of the day, the CEO, if they didn't actually request it, they're going to say, no, I didn't request that. And so that process is a big component to this. Like if there is an established process for wire transfer and for wire transfer requests, then a lot of BEC attacks would be stopped.
Thanks, Crane. That's some really great advice and very interesting discussion we've had here. Thanks for joining me on ZDNet Security Update. And for more information on how to keep your enterprise safe from cyber attacks, be sure to subscribe to the ZDNet YouTube channel and, of course, keep reading ZDNet. Thanks for watching.